Welcome to The Great Relearning. I'm Dr. Rob Williams, your host. Special thanks to the Baldwin brothers, Ian and Michael and Philip, and the Marion Institute for making The Great Relearning possible. And our very special guest today from all the way over the pond in London, Gary Lachman. Gary, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So
It's very, very good of you to have me on.
Yeah, as well. It's our honor. So, Gary, at The Great Relearning, we focus on three kind of central questions surrounding the human adventure. Number one, who are we as humans? Number two, where have we been as humans? And number three, everyone's perennial favorite, where might we be going as humans? And I should say, you've written more than I think a dozen books on matters esoteric, and what many call secret or hidden histories. And I've read a number of, I haven't read all of your books, but I've read a number of them, and you bring a really unique perspective to the table. And we wanted to focus on this beautiful book from 10 years ago today. It's called Caretakers of the Cosmos, Living Responsibly in an Unfinished World. And I thought we might just start with unpacking the title of this book and the subtitle, maybe beginning with this idea of the cosmos. I thought I understood what was meant by the cosmos until I read this book, and then I realized, actually, I walk us through that.
Well, I mean, cosmos is a word we usually use in the same way as like universe or something. You know, if you don't want to say universe twice in a sentence, you say the cosmos. You know,
That's right.
But they're actually although we use it interchangeably, they're very different sort of notions. And cosmos itself is a Greek word, and it is related to our word cosmetic. Beauty aids. We tend to think of something cosmetic as just surface, but it goes back to this notion of the cosmos has a certain order to it. There's a certain order, certain necessity to it, and it's a term that was coined some years back by one of the earliest philosophers, Pythagoras, a Greek philosopher who coined the term philosopher as well. Many of the terms that we still use, speculate. If you speculate on an idea, or if you speculate on a theory, because theory is another word that goes back to him, speculate is another word that goes back to him, which means you see in a certain way. We tend to think of it as like coming up with a concept, but it is in a certain way. If you go back to how Pythagoras would have understood it, it was actually seeing in an order, seeing something. It wasn't only just something that you thought up and put together. So that's, and even looking at something, a spectacle, and so on and so on. So that's the difference. I mean, in that book, I say, well, yeah, it's a cosmos means there's a certain sense of beauty and order, and so that's there, and it's not something that we impute to it. It's not something that we sort of read into it, which is sort of, I mean, there's a mathematical order, there's a certain, scientific order we have now, but our vision of the cosmos, well, we still use the word cosmos, but depends, I guess, our idea of what's beautiful has changed as well, because, I mean, going back, Pythagoras, he's talking about, the harmony of the spheres. So the philosopher is one who can recognize this beauty in the cosmos and recognize this order and these patterns and this regularity, and this kind of transcendent sort of necessity, the same necessity that, you might, in a mathematical formula, or for us in a piece of music, say like Bach or something like that, which seems to have, so many times when you have the spectacle of looking out into space, you will have some music like Bach or something like that. And I think, wasn't Bach included on that, I forget what it was called, but that sphere that was sent out into the great unknown with the collection of different artifacts, of human, design and handicraft to be, wherever it is, who knows where it is now.
Yeah, music is a form, and I know you're a musician from way back. I myself, music is a powerful way of mirroring the mystery.
Well, yeah, certainly, and certainly for Pythagoras, and for those who followed his school. Because another thing for Pythagoras was, he was a coined the term philosopher. It means lover of wisdom. There were a few before him, Thales, Anaximander, and these were sort of the Ionian school. And these are people that started asking questions that would eventually become what we understand as science, rational inquiry. So up until around, say, what they call the Axial Age, the German philosopher, 20th century philosopher Karl Jaspers coined this term, the Axial Age. And this was sort of, give or take, a century on either side around 500 BC. And this was a time when all over the planet, or the known world, different sort of spiritual, ethical, religious leaders emerge. You have the Buddha, Lao Tse, you have the Jewish patriarchs, you have Zarathustra, Confucius, and others. But what happened in the sort of Greek Mediterranean world was something different, where you have this emergence out of this mythical, not necessarily pre-rational, but sort of, it was a way to understand the world we lived in. It was, why did the gods do this? Why did the gods do that? So there was a story that sort of spelled out a narrative that this is why things are. But then you have people, Thales or somebody, asking, like, well, yeah, that's fine, but what's that made of? What's the basic stuff that the trees and the rocks and the flowers and the clouds and the moon up above, what are they all made of?
Matter.
So this was, what? Oh, nobody ever asked that kind of question before. And this was like a switch. So this was something that happened in the Axial Age back at that time. So he was sort of the first philosopher in the sense of someone asking those kind of questions, although that term didn't come around a while later until Pythagoras. But Pythagoras, he was someone who had, you could say, feet in both camps, because he was like them, like the others, asking these questions about what's the structure of the cosmos. And for him, it was number. It wasn't a stuff. So some said it was water, some said it was fire, some said it was air, or whatever. For him, it was an idea. It was number. But number, as we today, in the same way, everything is numbers, but it's not in the same way as for Pythagoras, because there was like an essence of oneness, or an essence of two-ness, duality, or something, up until about 10, where he has what he called the tetrarch, which is this figure of it's different, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they all add up to 10, and that was like our magical kind of number, and that summed up the entire kind of universe. You could understand, well, the cosmos, not the universe, that he wouldn't have called it the universe, the cosmos, through this sort of order, and so on and so on. But it was still a story. It was kind of there was, and it was like a philosophical order. His followers.
And am I
like
right?
A spiritual brotherhood.
Am I right in remembering, Gary, too, that you contrast the concept of the cosmos with chaos?
Well, the chaos is that's like before creation, the tohu bohu, before, in the Christian or Judaic tradition, before God, or Jehovah, Yahweh, his face was on the waters. Before then, it was all what the Greeks call hayal, which is kind of unformed, which is something they didn't like. They didn't like this kind of amorphous, viscous kind of something that wasn't anything in particular. And this was something that the Greeks didn't like. And all most, as far as I know, creation mythologies have some notion of that. There was like a non-form, a nothingness in some way, and out of it, something happened. So the cosmos is something that isn't chaotic. And there's a rationality to it that is the same rationality we share. So we the philosopher, can participate in that order. And that was, I mean, Pythagoras too. I mean, Pythagoras was a sort of rarefication or purification of the previous Orphic tradition, which was part of the mystery schools. It wasn't a philosophy. It was like a religious practice. We would call it spiritual. It was religious, and that came out of the Dionysian, which was this ecstatic.
Yes.
You participate with the god by throwing your, that all restraint off, and in this kind of divine madness. And then Orpheus, sort of, the whole myth of Orpheus started this tradition where they kind of rarefied that and made it less ecstatic and sort of visceral. became more of a kind of asceticism. And then Pythagoras took that on. They had this sort of asceticism in the Pythagorean Brotherhood. You know, they were vegetarians and things of that sort. But to that, they added what we would call the beginning of philosophy, sort of, you know, this kind of rational inquiry into the order of things.
Yes. And you just mentioned the participatory universe.
Hmm.
This word caretakers, the caretakers of the cosmos. Can you speak a bit about why you selected that particular word to describe
Um,
human role and the unfolding?
well, I mean, to tell you the truth, I mean, it started because I, I noticed that it seemed that, you know, if you wanted to be taken seriously as a very deep thinker, you just if you started just saying bad things about human beings, you know, people would think, yes, this guy's, you know, profound and he's, you know, hip to all the problems in the world and human beings are this kind of cancer or this horrible blight on the planet and so on and so on and so on. While, you know, I'm as aware, I hope as everyone should be of all, you know, the problems, you know, in the world and you know, many of them are at our doorstep, you know, I also felt that it was just a bit kind of selling us short.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there are traditions in which actually, you know, human beings, us, humanity, we play a central role, a very responsible role. Not in the sense that we're the greatest, although, you know, you are the crown of creation in one sense. That's in one tradition, but this in the sense that we're, you know, we're, well, again, you know, the whole modern notion is that there's no reason for anything. You know, things just happen. You know, Stephen Hawking's book, I forget what it was called, some years back, where he basically said, this is like, you know, here, we don't need God to explain, you know, but we knew that already. We knew that like in the 18th century, they were saying that. But he sort of says, well, you know, the universe came into existence through a quantum fluctuation in a pre-existing vacuum, which to me just says it happened. And, you know, we know that. We know that it happened. We sort of want to get some handle, some, you know, some traction on like why it happened. And there was one more I would add to those three questions. I would say, yes, and what are we supposed to do in that we find ourselves here? You know, which is the existential question. So here I am. I find myself in this world. You know, unless I believe in certain tenets of reincarnation, I didn't ask to be here. You know, I didn't have anything to do with it. Like
Well,
Kierkegaard, you know, Soren Kierkegaard, he said, if I'm forced to take part in this play, I would like to speak to the director. You know, so that's the other thing. You know, why are we here? Like, you know, what I mean, you know, what can you say? Whenever I really think about the idea that, as far as we know, what we call it, the cosmos, the universe, whatever it is, has been around for like 15 billion years. And, you know, less than nothing exploded for no reason back then. And that's why you and I are here now having this conversation. It does boggle the mind. And you wonder how could, out of all the possible scenarios that we could concoct, isn't that the weirdest possible thing you could think
yeah.
of and all that. So in any case, I'm drifting off
No, no,
into
not at
you
all.
know,
And
twilight zone there, but
I
that
was
was sort of, I was that was thinking, like that was the thinking behind, you know, behind the book. And so
yes, and
um
I so appreciate the way you have some playful fun with the scientific materialists and the neuroscientists. At what one point, I think you're right. No one knows how firing neurons become subjective experience. No one knows. And you also write, I think the hard problem of consciousness is only a hard problem for those who are unwilling to acknowledge that perhaps there's something more mysterious
well,
going on.
yeah, it's like, well, it's a hard problem if you want to know what you know, how did that apple become an orange? You know, you know, or how did that chalk become cheese? Or, you know, I mean, that's if you won't recognize that there's an equally real but different
Mm.
um whatever you want to call it, sphere, dimension, kind of reality part, you know, then then you're forced to try to explain that which is not like everything else, like everything else. And then you'd find yourself in the position where, well, someone like Francis Crick, um, one of the co-discoverers of DNA,
Right.
and he wrote this book in the 90s called The Astonishing Hypothesis. And this hypothesis is that, he says, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your ideals, everything that's important to you, your whole sense of yourself, is nothing but a result of, neurons firing in your brain, which they themselves are, the result of certain molecular, blah, blah, blah kinds of things. And I was thinking, oh, does that include yours too, Francis? Your hopes and dreams and your ideas, especially the ideas that everybody else's hopes and dreams and fears and ideals are nothing but. So it just so happens that of all the molecules doing whatever they do and all the neurons firing in our heads, yours were the lucky hit who actually hit on the one that was actually, you're the only one that knew this was all happening.
Yeah.
So just meaning, like, if everything going on in our head is nothing but, as he said, the firing, the idea that everything going on in my head is nothing but that is equally nothing but that. So it seems to undermine itself. You know what I
Yes.
mean? It
It
seems that there's a kind of
very quickly
self-erasure kind of logic there. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'd admit maybe I'm missing something, but it just seems like that to me. So I and other people like Daniel Dennett and Nicholas Humphreys, but some of them are scary because Nicholas Humphreys, he wrote a book called Soul Searching, and he took up the whole idea of like the soul. This was something that Descartes, one of the founders of the modern world, was interested in. Where is the soul? Where's the seat of the soul? That he thought it was in the pineal gland. Swedenborg, the Swedish savant, 18th century, who later became like a religious mystic, he too. But Humphreys wants to say that no, there's no such thing, and even though people have been saying that already, for years. But he said something I thought was very telling. He said that unexplained subjective phenomena like disturbs him. So it means, like, if there's something that he can't explain going on in your head, that
yes.
freaks him out. And I think, well, why? And what about going on in your head, Nicholas? So that was one of the things. That's a tie over from an earlier book called The Secret History of Consciousness, where I kind of look at. I started out looking at these contemporary scientific or science of mind, mainstream sort of ideas about consciousness, and then say, well, there's this whole other tradition, you call it the esoteric, or the speculative. But it's not only that, because like philosophers like William James and Henri Bergson and others, so they blend in. But getting back to Caretakers, the reason it's called Caretakers is because I started out saying, people like John Gray and others, or, very extreme animal rights groups like, I don't know, Earth First or some others, and or Echo, the biocentrism, it's a sense like all life is equal kind of thing. And then they were sort of like, human beings are being hit very, very hard as, like, being nothing but this blight on the planet. And I read a few John Gray's books. I don't know if he's as well known in the States as he is here. He's a very popular, sort of recognized social philosopher, but he's kind of like he's a very eloquent misanthrope.
Yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, his philosophy isn't that, different than Schopenhauer's or Marquis de Sades in some way. But any case, I thought, no, I'm gonna. There's this whole tradition, in the Hermetic tradition. As I start the book saying, the book has a rather strange title, and I have to explain. I pretty much have to write the book in order to explain what the title means.
Yes.
But in the Hermetic tradition, humanity holds this kind of intermediary place between the natural world, of which we're obviously a part of that, but we also inhabit this other world, this other realm. It's called spiritual or esoteric or inner, whatever. And it's given to, they say man, but they means humans. It's given to us to, take care of the earth in that way, but also to take care of this higher realm too. And this is through our inner world. This is the inner environmental crisis, the inner ecological crisis.
Yes.
The inner climate, change. We're all, again, of course, we have to deal with all these things in the outer world, but there's all this inner sort of stuff that we tend to not that's all individual. Pursuit of happiness, you can go do it yourself, but we participate. That's one of the things about the book as well. It's like talking about this earlier time, the pre-axial age. There was a sense in which human consciousness, some way, had a more participatory relationship to the world around it. We tend to see, there's the world out there and it's hard, and it's something that's very, very alien. It's out there, and I'm me, little puddle of consciousness inside my head here, and we're all kind of making sure we really think we know what each of us is talking about. But we have to deal with this hard outer world out there. But there was an earlier time when there was more of a permeable relationship, and you can see that in, well, one of the ways you can see it is the history of language. This fellow named Owen Barfield was a great fan of C.S. Lewis. He was one of the Inklings. He was also a follower of Rudolf Steiner. He wrote books about how, if you look back in the earlier times of language, language itself is more poetic, in the sense that it's more metaphoric, it's imagistic, it's more living. And that, to him, suggested that that was because consciousness at that point participated in the world more. And so you have the whole legends of spirits, and the sprites and the fairies and all that kind of thing. This was a way to talk about this living participatory, which over time we've moved out of. Whether that was a good thing or bad thing, it's what's happened. And we've developed this, or the sort of logical, rational, being able to deal with the world and master it.
And to jump from Barfield to McGilchrist, who you also do a beautiful job, I think, of explaining. Going back to the master and his emissary, right? Our left brain, once subordinate to the right, seems to, over the past many hundreds of years, taken over. Maybe you can speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. So, one of the things I do in my books is, because I read a lot, as I try to find links between the things, or I just see them. Through the reading, you see these links, and the way in which Barfield talks about how language at an earlier time has this more poetic, living character, is very much the way in which Ian McGilchrist, in his book The Master and His Emissary, talks about how a right brain consciousness would perceive the world, and still does in our poetic, aesthetic, very relaxed moments after the first glass or two of wine and all that, and suddenly everything that was boring becomes, oh, it's much more interesting now, kind of thing. So but well, in McGilchrist, the way he puts it, the right brain presents this global, total picture. It's everything all at once, but it's a bit fuzzy and blurry. It evolutionarily sort of developed the left brain, the emissary, in order to help it kind of unpack the picture, or, okay, what's that particular? What's that? What is that? What is that? So left brain's job is to navigate through the world. I mean, in other language, you could talk about in the terms of kind of like, well, the way I say it to myself is the right brain, the left brain deals with business, and the right brain deals with isness.
Oh, I like that.
All right. So the left brain deals with business. How do I deal with this? How do I have to deal with things? And its job, and what it does really well is to like turn everything around it into something that it knows already.
Yes.
And this is kind of logical, sequential, mechanical, yes, no, binary, either or sort of thing. And this was like, but having read McGilchrist, and I talk about this in Caretakers, is, I saw similar things in earlier philosophers like Alfred Whitehead, or the French philosopher Henri Bergson. And in Bergson's case, he said the brain, he wasn't talking about the left or right, but he's saying the brain is the organ of attention to life. So McGilchrist would say, and I would say, that's generally the left brain. It's like, how do I deal with things? How do I, its job is to get through life. We're living beings in a world which is, threatening and dangerous and all that. So that's kind of like survival consciousness. But then the other side is kind of like, well, why are you surviving in the first place? Well, it's in order to, have this sense of wellness and,
The isness.
the isness, that kind of thing, which is goes back to like Meister Eckhart. He talks about Istigkeit,
Mm.
the mystic, this kind of sense of being able to see things not as something there for our use, but things in themselves. But which initially we couldn't. We're dealing with the world, so we're able to now have these kind of conversations and be able to sort of explore these things because of years and years and years, millennia, millions of years of our ancestors just dealing with the world.
Mm.
And so at one point, being able to, I'm saying we're talking in these abstract terms, so I'm sort of turning them into characters of the story, but consciousness being able to pull itself out of that earlier or embedded sense was a boon, because it could deal more. It could manipulate the world around it better and more effectively, and so on and so on, at a price. The price
Yes,
is we lose the connectedness to everything.
yeah.
So now we're at a point where, like, it's the left brain has done its job too well.
Yes, I'm glad you just used the word manipulator, because I have here, you write about the left brain being the manipulator of the world, and the right brain, beautifully you write, is the guardian of the world. And that brings us back to the subtitle, Living Responsibly in an Unfinished World. And I mean, what you're proposing in the book, I think, is even more ambitious than what McGilchrist is up to with left and right brains. You're saying we move through two worlds at the same time. One is the material and the physical, and one is, let's say, the spiritual, for lack of a better term. And let me push you a little bit on this, because you say that humans are imaginative beings who create worlds. And I think amongst the brothers, there is a feeling that this seems almost uh, overly hubristic, perhaps, that this notion that humans must actualize, that and they wanted me to ask you about that. And let me maybe, you write at the beginning of the book, the introduction to your book is called Saving the Universe. And you quote Nikos Katsintzakis. And I had to put the book down when I read this. It was remarkable. You quote him saying, "It is not God who will save us. It is we who will save God by transmuting matter into spirit." So you're suggesting that humans have this kind of special role to play.
Well, I would say yes. I mean, I'd say this is responsible. Again, it's not like, oh, aren't we so great? Because we're not necessarily doing a very good job at it. And I mean, Kazantzakis is a particularly kind of fiery
Yes.
and Dionysian, and he was this remarkable, obviously Greek, but he was from Crete. Writer in the 20th century. Last Temptation of Christ is probably what most people know about him. But he was part of a school we might call a kind of life force, evolutionary, with people like Bergson or Bernard Shaw, Nietzsche to some extent, and others, who the notion that at some point what we call spirit somehow entered into matter. Maybe that was the Big Bang. Who knows? It's kind of sexual connotations there, and has been, sort of penetrating it ever since in some way, and gaining, its objective in a certain sense is, again, get greater and greater control. And I know these days this is like, we're not, this is not really what we're supposed to be sort of saying, that kind of thing. But this is a whole kind of school where he comes out of. But it's I mean, it's this idea that there's a certain kind of how should we say, struggle going on.
Yes.
And there's something at stake. I mean, people say save the planet. I say, but why stop there? Let's save the universe.
Yes.
Let's think big. And and in a sense, and the way I mean is because the whole, what does that mean? Transmuting matter into spirit. What does that mean? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, when we think about it, I mean, it's like where could we do that? Well, the most immediate place we have access to, in which we can try to do this in ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
all that means is to spiritualize ourselves,
Mm. So it's
and not, not to deny matter,
right.
because we're in the material. This is why we're inhabitants of these two worlds.
Yes,
We're
yes, yes.
caretakers of the physical world around us, but also of this interior kind of world. And I mean, I just want to bring these other traditions too. There's the Kabbalistic tradition of what they call Tikkun, which
Yes.
is this tradition of God in creating the universe that's screwed up. There's the whole idea of, there's the tree of life and the different Sephiroth. There's 10 Sephiroth down this. Well, it's not really anywhere like that, but that's how we graphically try to understand it. And these were the vessels that held the divine energies at the beginning of creation. And either there was too much energy and they overflowed, or the vessels were kind of weak and they shattered. But in the beginning was the spill. It's one of the chapters I
Yes,
say
you're
that,
right
and
about
this
that.
goes, yeah, and this is Itzhak Luria, a Kabbalist in medieval times, who he was trying to understand, the whole notion of creation and the evil and all this kind of thing. And this is why he said at the beginning there was this accident, and so there was a spillover, and splinters from the vessels kind of, shattered and broke, and so the universe is filled with these kind of broken bits of the original kind of energies. And so in order to kind of put Humpty Dumpty back together again in one way, God created man. So we were called in. They don't have him in the States, but here in the UK, there was like a kids TV program called Bob the Builder.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know if they have said, can he fix it? Yes, he
You can
can.
do
So
it. Can
that
you
was
do
like, they
it?
called it, we're the
Yes.
cosmic Bob the Builders that were,
Yes.
created in order to, and our job is to perform this service called Tikkun, in which we somehow release the energies that have been trapped.
Yeah.
And there's no specific thing you do to do that, but it's through acts of kindness or grace or whatever. And
It's a form of
and,
healing. It's a
and
form of repair.
it's form of repair. It's form of repair. So that's repairing, caretaking, guardians. You know, um, there's there's a sense in which, again, it isn't this like we're the greatest thing in the world, because we're doing that we're not doing that job.
Mm.
We're not doing that job.
It's less
But
about.
at the same time, if we say, "Oh, I'm nobody, I can't do anything," or "Oh my God, I'm a human being, we're so horrible, we've done nothing but like create a mess," and what you can't do that either.
Yeah.
The gardener is not a flower in the garden. He
Ah,
takes care of the garden, but he's
yeah.
not part of the garden himself. He's part of the garden insofar that he's taking care of the garden, but he's not rooted into the garden.
So it's
So
less about.
just like, when you take care of children, you can't be a child yourself. You can try to be with the children and be open to them and all that, but when it comes time to, be an adult, God forbid, you have to you have to be. So it's just recognizing that. So there's this, I think there's a certain kind of, I can't remember the exact quote, but you mentioned Kazantzaki, but there's someone, the 18th century French, early 19th century French mystic called Saint Martin.
Mm.
And he was known as the unknown philosopher because he originally wrote his books anonymously. And this is also he was writing around the time of the revolution, and there was, reason to sort of not be known, and all this kind of stuff. So there is all that kind of cloak and dagger background. But in one of his books, he talks about, I'm paraphrasing him now, but he talks about how by denying that we are the highest in creation, we are making a show of humility and,
Mm.
humbleness and so on and so on. But at the same time, we're excusing ourselves for not living up to the challenge of meeting, those requirements, of that in some way. So we get ourselves off the hook through this kind of, kind of thing like that. So, so I mean that was kind of the central theme of the book. Like, can we see ourselves in that kind of context rather in this,
Yeah.
how horrible we are.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, found different people through the reading that in some way echoed that, or in some way
Yeah.
communicated that. And
That's
it's, this, philosophers like Ernst, Max Scheler, Nikolai Berdyaev, who nobody knows about and reads about anymore, but they were very important people in the early 20th century. And they were trying to answer this question, like, what does it mean to be human? We have like economic man or Marxian man or
yes.
Freudian man or Nietzschean man or this, but what does it mean not to be one of those
Yeah.
explained in that ideology, or we know what we are biologically, but what is our place in the cosmos? What does it mean that we are here?
Yeah. So it's less about hubris and more about living responsibly, as you suggest, in an unfinished
Absolutely.
world and participating in the tikkun, the repair, the healing to the extent that each of us individually and perhaps collectively can.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
Rudolf Steiner, when I talk about him in the book, he says, we don't come into a world that's ready made, more or less.
Mm, yes. Just to
And we
pick
reflect
up
what's
on
there.
this Goldilocks principle,
Oh.
can
Well,
you?
the Goldilocks, it's like the Goldilocks thing is just right. So
Yes.
the just right can happen in different, I mean, together. It's just right. And that's when you have those moments of peak experiences, or, those moments of, vision or enlightenment or something like that. But if you mean in terms of what the cosmos, or I mean the earth in its place, that, because I do talk about that in that sense. I mean, um, well, what years ago, I actually worked as a science writer for UCLA.
Yes.
I should never got the job. There's a whole story behind that. I've actually been writing about it.
Yeah, you're right
But
about this book. Yeah.
I've been writing about it now. But there, I interviewed one of the astrophysicists there, and he was he was talking to me about what he called all these sort of just rights, these kind of cosmic coincidences, such like we have two big gas giant planets in these outer orbits, Jupiter and Saturn, and they absorb lots and lots of asteroids and meteors and other, cosmic debris that might otherwise come, towards our way. And the moon as well, and and our distance from the sun, and a variety of different things like that. And it's just like, well, it, it's just sort of, it's just right. Where it, whatever, a silly millimeter longer, or whatever, in one way or the other, it wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be here. And again, it goes back to that kind of thing, like of all the scenarios you could think of, like, we just happen to be here in some vast, it's we the whole idea of how big the universe is not, it's not even intelligible anymore, because there's what we call the observable universe, right?
Yeah.
That's the things that are still close enough for
Yes.
us that we can detect them in some way. But beyond them, the more likely are things so far away and moving so fast away from us that we will never know what's out there. So it's like, and I liken that in the book in some way to, when we look into our interior, because I can close my eyes and look into myself, and whatever I'm thinking about, or my worries or my memories and all that. But then where is all that coming from? There's like some place where all that is kind of like coming up, but I can never quite get to where that is. So there's an equally unobservable, or in the way that we can observe it inwardly, universe, cosmos, whatever you want to call it, inside us. And so again, it's just one of those things. You realize, well, if I keep looking back into it, where there's no place where it ends. I just keep going, or it's dark.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you suggest, without using this particular word, that the universe conspired to make possible the emergence of Homo sapiens, let's say.
Oh, well, this is the anthropic cosmological
Yes, I
principle.
had never heard that phrase before. The end. Say that again.
Yeah,
The
so a fellow named Frank Tipler, and I'm trying to remember his colleague who wrote with him about it. I can't remember right now. Uh, this idea was that, okay, it's one thing is that, the universe is such that it allows for living creatures with intelligence like ourselves to emerge in it, right? That seems obvious, right? Okay. Although when you have to think about it, for the longest time, we've tended to think, okay, there's the universe, and there's us over here. We're behind, behind like a plate glass, But no, it's the only universe we know is the one in which we are in.
We're
It's not
moving.
as if it's
Yeah,
like, oh,
yeah,
that's a universe over there. Oh, yeah,
yeah.
let me look at that one thing. No, it's when we're in. This is the existential thing again. So okay, but that seems obvious, but actually, it's an interesting point to grasp. And then it's like, somehow, you know, it gets to like, well, it is such that life in some form had to, in some way. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm jumping a couple of things, and this goes back to these cosmic coincidences I was
Yeah.
saying with the astrophysicist I interviewed years ago, and I think it's John Gribben, I think wrote a book about this back in the '80s too as well. And it's like, okay, so it's this Goldilocks, at least for us, kind of cosmos where things are just right.
Yeah.
They're just right. And so it's just so you either to think, my God, out of all the possible constants or whatever the word is they use that are out there, all the knobs are turned to whatever place on the dial. It just happened to be the one in which we popped up,
Yeah. John
or
Griffin.
was it somehow was it inevitable?
Yeah.
And so their idea was that it was somehow inevitable.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I take that and I take it a step further. I mentioned Swedenborg. He believed that there had to be life under the planets out there because that's how heaven is populated. Angels are human beings who have died and gone up to heaven. And so, in order to keep populating, I don't know where the angels go and why they need to have more there. But in order to keep populating heaven, you had to have more, souls, and the number of people that could, be born on Earth wouldn't be enough, apparently. So, but it's the whole idea. Like, not only is the universe such in which creatures like us emerge, not only is the universe such in which it is inevitable that creatures like us emerge, the universe is such and has been designed in order to create things like us. So again, I mean, that sounds like utter hubris. That sounds like utter, but in a way, I think, if you want to go for hubris, I forget where it is in the book where I say, I think the only reason the universe is interesting is because we're in it.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's just big stuff, cosmic gas and stuff that just is doing this and doing that, and who cares?
Yeah. And again, this
You
is the
know,
anthropic cosmological principle. The
yeah.
book was Cosmic Coincidences, John Gribben's book, 1989.
There you go. There you
Yeah,
go. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let me ask you this, Gary. I want to be respectful of our time. Where are you with indigenous traditions, Eastern traditions, in considering all of this stuff? Because
Well, I
you
mean,
to
sorry, go
focus
ahead.
on kind of the history of the Western esoteric
Yeah.
flow.
Well, that's just the area, that's just the patch I, found myself in. So I'm not as well versed in those, but I'm aware of it and respect it. And yes, and many of these traditions, they start out with this notion of us being, stewards or, you know, participate. Of course, this is the thing. This is why we in the West need to know this, where some people, it's not, they know it already. It's like part of their sort of being. We've lost that in order to have gained, um, the positive benefits of, the rational mind and all of that. But again, we've lost that connection. So, um, we can learn, from that a great deal. I mean, one of the people I talk about in the book is Cleve Baxter from years ago, who's the fellow who did all the experiments with plants and recognized that there was some kind of awareness in the plants. You know, there's awareness in us and in some in animals, but he discovered, that there were, plants could communicate with him and with each other and all that. And this is something that's actually, these days science is learning. Oops, sorry, keep touching my microphone. Science is, because I gesture a lot when I talk. Science is learning more of that. We're talking about the ways in which trees communicate with each other, and mycelium and things of that sort. So I think gradually something that, and the reason I'm bringing him up because that's something that is a traditional, notion that nature is alive.
Yeah.
Nature communicates with each other. I mean, William Blake, a robin redbreast in a cage puts all of nature in a rage. It's his whole notion that, there is this kind of continuum. And this is what the esoteric tradition, I would say in the West, the esoteric tradition is one in which it embodies in some ways some of these indigenous ideas, yeah, but in a different form. You might
Yes.
say, oh yes, well that's just like what we do back at home, but this was, this is a different whole context and culture in which it is. That's why it is an esoteric tradition. It's the hidden inner. It's not the upfront tradition. The upfront tradition is like, no, nature is just there.
Yeah.
It's just the stuff. We should take care of it. Yes, we're responsible. At least we're beginning to understand that, but it's not. It's alive in the sense that we have to feed it and water it, but it's not conscious. It's not talking to us in some way unless you take certain drugs. You know, it's and even earlier then, again, it was there for our use. But you have to put yourself in the context of a time long ago. Let's say when life was harder and rougher and we I think we have the luxury in many ways and the responsibility because we're aware of this now, and we in a certain way we have the leisure to be aware
Uh,
of the responsibility of it now because we're not really up against it. I know not everybody in the world is. I know lots of people in the world are, but
yeah.
we in the West or whatever you want to call it, we're not up against it in the same way, and so we can now think, oh yes, now I recognize that this is the price we've paid
Yeah. And I
for
hadn't thought of it.
being able to live this kind of, because we live lives that kings of old couldn't even dream of. I mean, just us now doing this.
Yes.
This is magic. Oh my God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I hadn't really thought of this, Gary, but it almost feels like the Western, let's say, esoteric traditions have in some ways served as kind of a bit of preserving ground for maybe indigenous and Eastern ways of thinking, transmuted into kind of
I
more.
mean, what I say in another book called Secret Teachers of the Western World, there's a lot of secrets. Secret Teachers of the Western World, where I explicitly talk about E. McGilchrist's work, but also there you go, also in the context of another philosopher, Jean Gebser, who people talk about, but he talks about structures of consciousness. And again, there's somebody where there's overlap and there's resonance and they seem to be talking about the same thing. But what I say is, I say the Western esoteric Hermetic tradition is a repository of right brain knowledge.
Uh,
Because McGilchrist's thing is that at a certain time, the left brain, which is the emissary, got uppity and considered itself the boss.
yes.
So the emissary took over from the master. And I say in that book that that's very much like the Gnostic tradition, going back to the early years of Christianity in Alexandria, where the Gnostic myth was that the God of the Bible, the Jehovah, Yahweh, he's not the real God. He's this, what they call a demiurge. He's kind of like a Bob the Builder that God hired out because God wanted to create something, but he doesn't do it. He hires out. He doesn't dirty his hands. He's sub whatever
Contracts.
subcontracts,
Right, right.
and so he got this demiurge to, it's kind of like half god kind of, to do the work, and the demiurge was so, yeah, this is good, man. It was so, full of himself. He was like, I'm in charge here. And we live in the world that the demiurge made. This is the Gnostic paranoid vision, and this is
Yes.
like the Matrix, and we live in a
Yes.
simulation or Plato's cave and all that. So we live in this world that's not the true world. It's the world created by the demiurge.
Mhm.
But that's, if you put it in terms of McGilchrist's dialectic conflict between the two brains, the left brain is the demiurge. The left brain has created this world that isn't the real world, but it's a world that works really well, and we live in it, and we can't get out of it. And what McGilchrist thing is like, the two brains used to work as the U.S. politics used to, a system of checks and balances, between the different, bodies of government, and that works. So one would mitigate the excesses of the other, right?
Yes.
So because it's not as if we need to go plunge back into a total right brain. It's pleasant, it's lovely, it's fantastic, it's mystical, but it's like you don't do anything. It's like Aldous Huxley said that if everyone took mescaline, there'd be no wars, but there'd be no civilization either. Because no one would want to do the boring work of creating civilization. It's
Right.
the left brain, which doesn't feel that kind of, doesn't have that embeddedness. It doesn't feel that participatory, and it's always anxious. It's always it needs to do stuff. It needs to make something and all that.
Yeah.
But what's happened is that that's taken over. Yeah, left is taken over because the right hand's connected to the left brain. So the left has taken over, and it's increasingly the right. And it's what it likes to do better than anything else is create a world around it, which is everything like something else that I know already. Because that's the easiest way for me to deal with things. And what that means is that I need less and less of any kind of input from the right brain. But the right brain doesn't do anything. It just is.
Yeah.
It's not. So the left brain is this fanatic, maniac who's out there always doing stuff. And right brain is this, hey man, really chill, and you can lollygag and all that.
Yeah.
And it's like, so get the two together, and it's work. So there's these opposite kind of things. So it's getting the two to work together, which is the ideal. That's the Goldilocks moment, when the two work together.
That's the Goldilocks moment. Yeah.
It's just right. It's just not left. It's not right. It's just right.
Yeah. Well, so last question, and you just kind of anticipated it there. We always ask our guests on The Great Relearning, what strategic advice, Gary, would you give to the human species, Homo sapiens, perhaps particularly in the West at this moment? And let me say one more thing. I really appreciated, both in your book and in this conversation, how you kind of called out the humans are a virus, humans are a cancer, humans are a scourge on the planet mentality. I see this in my university students, and they can't get out of bed in the morning. It's horrible. So the vision that you
classrooms, don't they? Really?
Well, yeah, the vision you present here to me seems much more appealing. But what strategic advice would you have for?
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, well, I can jokingly say read my books, but
Of course,
it would help out both of us. But
yeah.
I would say that, question this idea that we're take responsibility for. See, the thing is, get rid of guilt. Guilt is an indulgence. Responsibility is something you could do something with. Guilt is something you just and and it's a kind of masochistic pleasure in it in some ways. So I would say, throw off any sense of guilt, but take responsibility. And okay, the easiest thing you could do, and this will give you some homework. Again, going back to Swedenborg, he said, okay, do the good that you know. Do the good that you know. Don't go around thinking what is good, what isn't good. You don't have to go save the world, which is another one. Goethe said, do something good without having to save the world or without having to change the world. Do the good that, it could mean just taking the trash out, could mean doing the dishes, but it could mean something else or something like that. But you don't, and it's right in front of you. You don't have to look for it. So do the good that you know, and it's right in front of you.
And for those listening and watching, that's chapter 3. I love that you said that, because that was one of my favorite moments in the book. Well, let's end with the epigraph to your book. Once again, Nikos Kazantzakis, because I think it was so beautifully chosen. He wrote this, that fiery Cretan. If we all desire it intensely, if we organize all the visible and invisible powers of earth and fling them upward, if we all battle together like fellow combatants, eternally vigilant, then the universe might possibly be saved. It's a remarkable book, and remarkable pantheon. Gary, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thanks to our listeners and watchers here at The Great Relearning. Special thanks to Ian and Michael and Philip Baldwin and the Marian Institute. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we will see you again soon. Welcome to The Great Relearning. I'm Dr. Rob Williams, your host, and with us, of course, in the Great Relearning room, we have the Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
It's so good to see you. And the book under discussion over the next few minutes is Gary Lachman's book, I love this title, Caretakers of the Cosmos, Living Responsibly in an Unfinished World. So what do we make of Gary Lachman's book and his, of course, larger work, which is prolific?
Well, first of all, if I could kick off, yes, we're talking about the book, but we're also talking about the interview that you just did with him. And I re-listened to that in preparation for this chat. And one of the first things that stuck out for me in the early part of the conversation was the referencing of the Axial Age, and how circa 500 BC, you had both East and West, a lot of extraordinary stuff going on, such as Confucius, the Buddha, and Pythagoras, and all that followed from that. And it's particularly interesting, these linkages, I would like to think, as opposed to divergences in all of this. And for example, we refer to, or he refers to Pythagoras as sort of bringing in science and the sacredness of number. And I couldn't help thinking, well, jeepers, okay, it's an axial age, and with science and number, you get to on the road to where we are today. But meanwhile, for the previous 2,500 years, you had the Egyptian civilization building pyramids whose construction we still can't figure out. And it would occur to me that even though the Egyptians subscribed to a very different, shall I say, kind of consciousness than the one we know, they nevertheless had to have one hell of a pretty fine command of science and number to pull it off, unless we're missing something really big. And there's this tendency, I feel, to set ourselves up in the West, starting with Pythagoras and, of course, his antecedents as well as followers in this tiny little period of 120 years or so, literally parallel to the time of the Buddha and Confucius. And it's a bit of a conundrum for me. And it seems to me that's a good starting point to chew on.
Well, and it also, Philip, I think, goes to show the difference between the way in which the Egyptians thought and resisted the thinking that evidently existed contemporaneously in Byzantine, right? You know, with the invention of the water, the thing that got the water out of the ground, you know, the cleverness with the mechanism, and how the Egyptians said, we're not having any part of that, but didn't sort of, but was very much aware of it as something that would make life a little bit easier insofar as retrieval of water, for instance, but that rejected that mechanistic kind of thinking.
Wonderful example, Michael.
But I also think it's, of course, for me, what was so fascinating for me is I had no sort of conception that there was actually evolution with respect to consciousness, and the way the thinking existed pre-axial, axial, and then in different stages post-axial. And then what I also thought was fascinating was the use of poetry going much further back, and the development of prose. And I think you can sort of feel the contrast between the two as a way of communication or a way of feeling, which I also thought was fascinating. The whole book is loaded as far as I'm concerned. I've never underwritten, underlined so much stuff in a book. So I don't know. It's a doozer. It's a doozer.
What continually troubles me in the concentration on the Western esoteric tradition, there's an underlying assumption that consciousness evolves. I can agree that consciousness changes, and we're seeing, if you look historically, for example, at the Egyptians and then the Greeks, et cetera, until you get up to the Enlightenment and so on, you have to agree consciousness has gone through a lot of change. Does it merit the word evolution?
No.
I'm not
no,
so
I
sure.
agree.
What would the 2 million indigenous people who still exist on this planet have to say about that?
No, I agree. And I shouldn't have used evolve. I should have used change, because evolve has the connotation of progress, which is totally not where I think any of us is.
I think that's rather at the nub of it, Michael. And that's an extremely good point. Yes.
Yeah. When he used or introduces the term caretaker, which in the case, I mean, he made a positive point that I think he and Rob agreed on, was a positive point, which is that we're so involved in lacerating ourselves and coming up with antidotes like wokeism to our many, many crimes that stretch back now at least a century. That how about conceiving ourselves a little differently? And that is as caretakers, that is having responsibility. I didn't get, so the whole idea of a caretaker or humans as caretakers is, as you both agree, I know, indigenous or native. And
exactly.
Where does this take us? Both of you made some, when I say you and Rob and Gary, made much of the left and right brain discourse. And the idea of somehow bringing them together, because the emissary, like what is the Goethe, which Prokofiev or someone did the brooms and the buckets.
Sorcerer's
Yes, Sorcerer's Apprentice.
The sorcerer's apprentice, okay? So they created a huge mess, which is why we're here, really. Who did this? And so that's why I think this master and emissary conversation is powerful, because in the music and the original poetry, the master trusted the servant, the emissary, to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I'm saying this, the antecedent to all of this, which was introduced again by Gary in his talk with you, Rob, which is the Gnostic business of God didn't do it.
Yeah.
Didn't do creation. He assigned the demiurge, this is Gnostic, to do it. And the demiurge, of course, made a mess of it, primarily with with the humans. And that rectification is a whole strand, which then you two didn't go down, but could be gone down in another interview with someone else. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, that you went straight to what I had hoped we would get to, Ian, because in the notes I made, I think Gary conveys, he doesn't, he phrases it in the sense that the demiurge what was the expression he used? Deals with the business. And
Yeah.
the left brain and the light brain,
That's right.
of course, is about isness. I rather liked business as isness because and isness, because a pea brain like me can remember a little thing like that and set up a whole story. And so you had the feeling that, well, all right. And of course, then I'm always reminded, and I'm a broken record on this, but the famous quote attributed to Einstein, which is that, you know, the right brain is a gift and the left brain is its servant. And we've forgotten the gift, and only it's been, the roles have been reversed.
Right.
And the implication being that that's backwards. And in the case of what Ian's saying about the demiurge, as he said, it got badly screwed up. And where do we get to with that? We get to the constant, endless problem of balance. And we've been out of balance, it seems to me, dare I say it, since we stopped being indigenous.
That's right.
Well, you made a point earlier, which I thought was right on, which is this axial age concept, which has a lot going for it, roughly 500 BC, where all over the known world, great philosophies and religions were developed, which constituted some kind of change in consciousness. Couldn't agree more. Evolution is a bad word for exactly why Michael says. So it's a change. But if you look back a good 2,000 years, accomplishments in building, and for all we know, other arts, such as music and many others, were accomplished that are still not truly understood. The Great Pyramid, people are still arguing and confused about how old is the Sphinx. And we have these mysteries, in other words, that indicate enormous sophistication and capacity. So there's too much going on with this right-left brain stuff. The right brain was capable, if we want to call it that, was capable of immense things. Göbekli Tepe, which we haven't gone into fully yet, but Graham did. How the heck does one accomplish things like knowledge of the precessional cycle with just the right brain? And why wouldn't that be enough? Why indeed did the left brain pop up in the first place? It's not clear to me. You know, since we're, for the benefit of the listeners, Ian McGilchrist, who is a brilliant, I think British psychologist, has written, he doesn't write, he writes fat books. Anyway, he's written a brilliant book, which we're hoping at some point to discuss as a foursome.
Right.
But this whole idea that this dead-on split, I'm not sure about it.
I agree thoroughly with this here. It's a marriage, and they do a dance together, and they collaborate together. You're an artist, I'm an artist. Craftsmanship is interwoven with creativity. They are joined at the hip.
And discipline.
Okay. And you can't really separate them. And it seems to me that's as it should be. Once again, it's this, and we don't want to separate them. Their separateness is the problem we're in. And that somehow this left brain stuff is overtaken us. And it's, in some ways, our whole project here and all these interviews are searching for this right balance. So it's not about trashing one or the other. It's about finding the right mix. And we are definitely not in the right mix.
No, but don't you also, it seems to me, a major issue here is the creativity of our consciousness. I mean, that the responsibility, which is what he so ends the book about, the responsibility that we have, because our consciousness is creative, and we are generating this dominance in the left brain, or we're generating the axial thinking, or we're generating whatever it may be in the way of change manifest today in ways that I guess we're all rather perturbed about. So therein lies the responsibility of this creativity within each of us. And when are we going to step up and take it more seriously by being able to, understand the sort of the dreadful period we're in and do something about it.
Yeah, that's so
beautiful. I mean, I just find it so fascinating that I think one of the impressions is that the further back you go, the greater sophistication and awareness about reality. And, this theory I think that we all share about devolution versus the evolution which looks so much like progress.
The only, yes, in complete accord. The only thing is, again, it's this very neat compartmentalization. Of course, there is this thing called the corpus callosum, which joins them.
Yeah.
And therefore, and maybe you all are, but I'm not up to date enough to jump into that and pretend I am up to date. But the two do communicate. And this is what we're talking about. How did they get out of balance?
Yeah.
So that the emissary took over the tasks of consciousness.
Yes.
Well, what I would say is, I love this little bit in the end, our place in the universe, where he says, we can save the universe, we can repair it, take care of it, redeem it, and awaken it from its trance by becoming aware of our own creative contribution to reality, and by intensifying our consciousness to such a degree that we never lose sight of this fact.
That is a beautiful place, maybe, to.
Have we done our? Because I could go on. I was sort of sleepy at the start, but I could go on.
Being mindful of our time. But Michael,
all right. The only thing go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
That was the same exact sentence, Michael, I had sort of highlighted as kind of a way to bring it all together. Ian, please.
Well, if you feel that's a good conclusion, then I'll be quiet, because I think otherwise we go on beyond our.
Yeah, we'll have other opportunities.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd say is the subtitle of Gary's book, one more time, Living Responsibly.
Right.
Unfinished world. To our conversations today about creativity, about balance, about tapping into our indigenous side, whatever that means. I think we have to unpack that. Linkages, Philip, right? All of these concepts are just burbling now. They're burbling.
Yes, and I think this conversation is in some ways the best yet. I assume we're off the air, so to speak.
Not quite yet.
Not quite yet, Philip.
we do, I think, need to pull ourselves together and find a good indigenous spokesperson who for me, that that wouldn't necessarily, yes, it would necessarily imply indigenous, and the old world, I'm not sure how many indigenous peoples are left there, but in the new world, there still are some, or there are spokesmen
Yes,
or women, spokeswomen.
we do have some leads and some relationships with with
Right.
yeah. So, well, let me bring us to a close. So wonderful as always to unpack the books and conversations, the great relearning, and appreciate all three of you very much. And of course, shout out to the Marian Institute for supporting this, and to all three of you brothers, Ian and Michael and Philip. Until next time, let us remember conversation is contagious, and the great relearning will continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.